Hi everyone, I'm Kristi DeMeester, and I am very thrilled to be able to participate and say a very, very, very happy birthday to one Mother Horror who has been an indispensable addition to the horror community. And I think that speaking as a writer, so many of us appreciate so much of what Sadie has done for us and in talking about our books on a public platform. So thank you to her and a very happy birthday. And before I begin, cheers to you. And what I'm going to be reading from today is in honor of Sadie, is from MISCREATIONS, God's Monstrosities and Other Horrors, which I was privileged enough to be included with a number of writers who I really admire and hold in great esteem. So I'm going to read about 5 to 10 minutes from UMBRA SUN, and yes, I am going to time myself because if I don't, I will run long because that is how I roll. But I'm very happy to be able to do this. So this is my story that is titled UMBRA SUN, included in MISCREATIONS. My mother plaited my hair the night the river swelled over its banks. There are so many who see only an end in water, she said. She tied a ribbon the color of dying sunlight at the bottom before turning to face Thomas, who had not spoken since the rain began the week prior. Some would call it a cleansing, my mother said, but Thomas's face was still, his mouth a sloped mound of reddened flesh that had long forgotten the shape it once knew. As quickly as she had done it, my mother undid the braid, her fingers slashing through my hair so that my scalp smarted, but I knew there was no use in my weak urge to cry out, to ask her to please stop. Above us, the light flickered, the power giving in momentarily to the swaying winds of the storm. Thomas's face was so like my own in that blinking darkness that it was hard to tell if he was even there at all, if his body was nothing more than a mirrored image of my own, mute and staring at whatever he'd found behind his silence. At school, our teachers saw the oblong shape of our faces, the muddy green of our eyes, the slight tint of our skins, and believed we'd emerged from the womb tangled up together, our breaths coming in that same instant and tying us into some larger existence that transcended the simple connections of blood. They saw it in the tilt of our heads when we grew bored with the lesson, heard it in our voices when we pretended to answer their questions. But we were not born on the same day. When I dreamed of you, when I called you to me, it was the same face I saw, our mother said, but the years stretched between us. We were not tied in the traditional ways of those born on the same day. 3 years apart, our teachers would say, and cluck their tongues as if we had betrayed them while they weren't looking. There were a handful of times, Thomas had told me it happened to him too, when our teachers seemed to forget we were there. They would stare past our raised hands, or mark us absent, or would start, a small, strangled scream dying in their bellies, when they realized we were standing behind them, our lips wrapped around a question. It makes me feel like a ghost, I told him, and he would hold his hands out before him and moan until I hit him hard enough in the chest to make him stop. I stared at him, but his face was his own again, and my mouth tasted of something bitter, and I blinked, my hands twitching toward him because my mother, our mother, had turned away and would not see me when I traced my fingers over his hands, the bare, smooth skin of his forearms, to spell out the words I imagined would pull him back to me. Conjure, I wrote. Come back, you fucker. His hands remained limp against his lap, and the rain beat out a pattern above us that sounded like mourning, and I imagined what it would be like for no other words to pass between us. What kind of death it would be to acknowledge there were no more nights where he came into my room without knocking and slipped beneath the thin sheet I draped over myself, not because I was cold, but because it felt unnatural to sleep bare and press wet lips to my ear, my hair, and tell me of what it had been like to be here before I had come, always knowing there was a part of him missing. Instead of touching him again, I traced my fingers over pieces of me that were hollowed out, the dip in my throat where my collarbone met, the space between my breasts, the angled slash of my hip bones, the singular spaces between my ribs. All of these secret spaces I had found when Thomas stopped speaking. So many nights of swallowed air so I could learn of these new places inside of me that belonged to neither of us. Our mother hadn't noticed yet how thin I had gotten. He should drink something. It's been so long since he's had anything to drink, our mother said, but Thomas's mouth stayed sealed. even when she tried to force the glass to his lips, the water dribbling down his chin to drop against his lap. He did not swallow, and I thought of what it would mean to pull him outside into the storm, and what it would mean to force that water into him before it came and drowned us all. Our mother mumbled something about our plight and went stumbling out of the room again. I pinched the tops of Thomas's hands, but he still did not move, did not turn to look at me, and I wished the water would come crashing against the house, fill up our lungs with brown silt, our choking, gibbering bodies twisted into a beautiful tableau. Maybe then all of those years of feeling that Thomas and I had swallowed each other, had vanished into the other's body, would actually mean something. Our mother baked bread and apples with cinnamon and set out the plates, but there was no one to eat the things she made. The rain was too heavy overhead and sounded like an accusation, or maybe it was prayer. That night I stood outside Thomas's bedroom door, my lips pressed to the wood, but I could not bring myself to ask the questions bursting in my throat. Instead, I waited. I listened for the sound of his breath, which I had learned to know as well as my own. I heard nothing except the steady beat of my own heart, and turned away, my own room like a hollowed-out reminder of what had once been. There was no place for sleep, so I sneaked into the kitchen and sank a spoon into what remained of the apples and swallowed the slices without chewing, my lips coated in a sweetness I could not taste. I hoped for suffocation. Inside her room, our mother prayed, but her words were garbled imitations of what Thomas and I had learned in Sunday school when we were children. I laid another piece of apple across my tongue and watched the windows. Outside, the grass was painted in silver, but it was not moonlight. I closed my eyes. "Is this what you saw?" I whispered, but Thomas was not in his room. He was not in the house. Whatever sat behind my brother's door no longer had the same heartbeat. I could hear the wrongness of it, how it bent and stretched around the emptiness and grew into the hammering of the rain on the roof. The apples sank into my stomach like small stones, and I tried to keep them, tried to hold them inside of me, but my body had forgotten what it was to eat, and so I leaned over the sink and gagged as my body purged itself. Inside her bedroom, my mother believed that the end of the world had come, that the water would continue to fall from the sky, would turn yellow and sulphurous, the kind of thing that burned, exposed skin, or made small children ill from the deep stink of it. Tomorrow she would braid my hair in the same way she had, because it was the only thing left she could do with her hands that was not slapping Thomas again and again, and she would believe she was doing some right by me. "It's only rain," I said. Outside, the light shifted from silver to a putrid yellow, and I turned away. Thomas's room was silent as I shuffled past, and I pressed my hand to his door as I went. I thought my palm would burn, but it didn't. I left my clothes on and lay down and draped the sheet over my face and pretended I was dead and wondered if it would feel as delicate as this to be put into the earth. And that is a very good place to stop. So, if you do like the story, I would love it if you would check out the entire anthology. It's really wonderful. And keep supporting horror, and happy birthday to Mother Horror again and Sadie. And thank you for letting me do this. Happy birthday!